No one could have imagined that poor boy would one day sit in the U.S. Senate. But J.D. Vance did exactly that. From the dusty roads of Appalachia to Yale Law School, then to the Ohio Senate, and now to the highest political echelon of the country, his life is an American story worthy of Hollywood. Raised by his grandmother in Middletown, Ohio, young J.D. never lost hope, even as his mother struggled with drug addiction and his father disappeared from the picture. But what's truly shocking is how he emerged from this impoverished and traumatic childhood to become one of America's most influential politicians today. Growing up, days when we had 2 meals were like holidays, he would recount in interviews. He was raised in a home where fighting for food was common, where violence and chaos were part of daily life. Yet even then, there was something different about him. His grandmother, whom he called Mama, saw it too, pushing him harder than the other kids. But just as J.D. was beginning to find stability, everything changed when the phone rang one night. His mother had overdosed again. This time was different, though. This time J.D. knew he couldn't keep living this way. At just 16, he made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his life forever. The Marine Corps became his escape and his salvation. Most people don't realize that before the polished politician, before the best-selling author, J.D. Vance was simply a scared teenager looking for structure in a chaotic world. What he didn't know then was that those 4 years in the military would forge the disciplined mindset that would later catapult him into America's elite circles. Stop for a moment and imagine this transformation. From a boy who once had to steal food to survive to a Yale Law School graduate being mentored by future Supreme Court justices. But the most surprising part of his journey was still to come. When his memoir Hillbilly Elegy was published in 2016, no one, least of all Vance himself, could have predicted the seismic impact it would have. What was meant to be a personal reflection on growing up poor in America's forgotten communities suddenly became the lens through which coastal elites attempted to understand Trump's America. The book thrust him into the national spotlight, but that newfound fame came with a price. As the cameras turned toward him, every word he'd ever spoken, every opinion he'd ever held, was now subject to scrutiny. And there in his past, lurking like shadows, were statements that would come back to haunt him when he least expected it. Vance had once been an outspoken critic of Donald Trump. "I can't stomach Trump," he had tweeted during the 2016 campaign. "He's noxious." Yet by 2022, when he decided to run for Senate, something incredible had happened. The very man he had once denounced was now his most powerful endorser. What had changed? That's where the story gets even more fascinating. Behind closed doors, J.D. Vance was wrestling with the greatest dilemma of his political career. The establishment Republicans wanted him to maintain his anti-Trump stance. His potential voters in Ohio, many from the same working-class background as himself, overwhelmingly supported Trump. What would he choose? Political expediency or personal conviction? When the door to the conference room opened and J.D. stepped out, his decision was made. He would embrace Trump, fully and publicly. It was a gamble that would either destroy his political future or secure it. You'll never believe what happened next. The endorsement came on a spring day in 2022. Donald Trump, speaking to a crowd in Ohio, called J.D. Vance to the stage and proclaimed him the future of the Republican Party. The crowd erupted. The same people who had heard about Vance's previous criticisms were now cheering him on as a champion of their values. The transformation was complete. But wait, there's something you don't know about that day. Just minutes before walking on stage, Vance received a text message that nearly made him turn back. His mother, years into recovery but still fragile, had seen the news about the endorsement. "Is this really who you are now?" she had written. The weight of that question would hang over him long after the applause faded. What makes J.D. Vance such a compelling figure isn't just his dramatic rise from poverty or his political evolution. It's the constant tension between who he was, who he is, and who he's becoming. The hillbilly turned Marine, turned lawyer, turned venture capitalist, turned author, turned senator. Each transformation leaving parts of himself behind while acquiring new layers of identity. "Sometimes I don't recognize myself," he confided to a close aide after winning the Senate race. "But then I remember Mama saying change isn't betrayal if your core values stay intact." Did his core values remain? That's the question that keeps political analysts debating late into the night. The true test came when he had to cast his first significant vote as senator. The bill on the table would cut funding to addiction recovery programs similar to the one that had saved his mother's life. The party expected him to vote along Republican lines. His personal history pulled him in the opposite direction. As the roll call reached his name, the chamber fell silent. What happened in the next 10 seconds would define his Senate career. "Vance!" the clerk called out. The new senator from Ohio paused, his finger hovering over the button. Images flashed through his mind, his mother's hollow eyes during her worst days, the rehabilitation center where she'd finally found help, the faces of Ohioans struggling with the same demons. But he also saw the voters who had put their faith in him to advance conservative values, to resist government overreach, to be the voice they had lacked for so long. "No," he finally said, voting against the cuts. The chamber erupted in whispers. He had broken ranks on his first major vote. Back in his office, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Party leaders demanded explanations, but there was one call he took immediately, from his grandmother's old number, now used by his uncle. "Mama would be proud today," was all his uncle said. Just when you think you understand J.D. Vance, he reveals another layer of complexity. The media portrays him alternately as an opportunist who abandoned his criticisms of Trump for political gain, or as a genuine convert who came to appreciate the former president's policies. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the messy middle, in the space where ambition meets conviction, where personal history collides with political reality. What few people know is that Vance keeps a journal, a habit he started in the Marines. In its pages, far from public view, he wrestles with these contradictions daily. "Am I becoming what I once despised?" he wrote the night after a particularly partisan speech. "Or am I finally becoming who I was always meant to be?" The answer to that question remains hidden even from his closest advisors. The most dramatic moment of his early Senate career came during a heated debate on immigration policy. A Democratic senator from California, herself the daughter of immigrants, challenged Vance directly. "Senator," she said, "how do you reconcile your own family's struggle for dignity with policies that deny that same dignity to families at the border?" The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the freshman senator from Ohio. What he said next left everyone speechless. "My family taught me that dignity isn't given. It's earned through hard work and playing by the rules," he responded, his voice steady but intense. "I want immigrants to have the same opportunity for dignity that my family fought for. Which is why I believe in a system where the rules are clear, fair, and actually enforced." It wasn't the answer anyone expected, neither fully conservative nor progressive, and it revealed something crucial about Vance's evolving political philosophy. But here's what the cameras didn't capture. After the session, that same Democratic senator approached him privately. "My parents would have agreed with you," she admitted. "Even if I don't." That moment of unexpected connection across the political divide would become increasingly rare as Vance's national profile rose and the pressure to conform to partisan expectations intensified. You might think you know where this story is heading, the familiar trajectory of an outsider who becomes the ultimate insider, losing touch with his roots along the way. But that's not quite what happened with J.D. Vance. Every month, without fanfare or press releases, he returns to Middletown. He walks the same streets, visits the same diner, talks to the same people who knew him when he was just a skinny kid with too many problems and too few prospects. "Politicians are always telling people like us that they understand our problems," said Mike, a factory worker who's known Vance since childhood. "The difference with J.D. is that he doesn't have to pretend. He lived it." That authentic connection to his roots remains his greatest political asset, and perhaps his greatest personal anchor in the stormy seas of Washington politics. Just when his Senate career was gaining momentum, crisis struck at home. His mother, 16 years sober, relapsed after a routine surgery led to an opioid prescription. The news reached him during a crucial committee vote. What the public saw was Senator Vance excusing himself for a family emergency. What they didn't see was the 6-hour drive he made that night, the hospital waiting room where he sat until dawn, or the tears that came when the doctor finally emerged with news. She would recover, but the experience shook him to his core. It also fueled his first major legislative initiative, a bipartisan bill addressing the overprescription of opioids. Working across the aisle with a senator whose own family had been touched by addiction, Vance demonstrated a pragmatism that surprised both his allies and critics. The bill passed with overwhelming support, giving him his first significant legislative win. But don't be fooled. This moment of bipartisanship didn't signal a moderate turn in his overall politics. On cultural issues, Vance remained firmly conservative, often taking positions that generated intense backlash from progressive circles. When asked about this apparent contradiction, he offered an insight into his political philosophy that few had considered before. The problems facing ordinary Americans aren't neatly partisan, he explained in a speech that would later go viral. They're not solved by pure conservative orthodoxy or progressive dogma. They require the courage to take the best ideas wherever they're found. It was a statement that earned him both admiration and suspicion from different quarters of the political spectrum. The real test of this philosophy came when the president, the very man whose endorsement had helped launch his Senate career, called him personally about an upcoming vote. The legislation in question would benefit many of Trump's business interests, while potentially harming manufacturing in Ohio. As Vance listened to the familiar voice on the other end of the line, he faced the most difficult decision of his political career. The call lasted 47 minutes. What was said remains between the two men, but when it ended, Vance sat alone in his office for a long time. The next day, when the vote was called, he stood and spoke words that would be replayed on every news channel in America. "I respect the president greatly, but my first loyalty is to the people of Ohio." He voted against the bill, becoming one of only 3 Republicans to break ranks. The backlash was swift and severe. Former allies called him a traitor. Social media exploded with attacks from the right. For a week, it seemed his political career might be over before it had truly begun. But then something unexpected happened in Middletown. A spontaneous rally formed outside his local office. Not political operatives or organized supporters, just ordinary people, many wearing the uniforms of factories and hospitals and construction sites. They carried handmade signs reading "Courage Matters" and "Ohio First." The images went national, changing the narrative overnight. The man who had defied a president had somehow become even more authentic in the eyes of his constituents. What you don't know is what happened that night, after the cameras left and the crowds dispersed. Vance drove to the cemetery where his grandmother was buried. In the fading light, he stood at her grave and spoke as if she could hear him. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me," he said, "about being your own person, about standing for something." A groundskeeper later reported seeing the senator sitting there until well after dark, seemingly wrestling with ghosts only he could see. The most fascinating aspect of J.D. Vance isn't his politics or his policies. It's the ongoing internal struggle that plays out on the national stage. The boy who escaped poverty through education and military service, the author who exposed his family's deepest wounds to the world, the politician navigating the treacherous waters of partisan expectations. All these versions of J.D. Vance coexist, sometimes in harmony, often in conflict. "I contain multitudes," he once quoted to a reporter who pressed him on his political evolution. The Walt Whitman reference was telling, an acknowledgement of the contradictions that define not just his life, but the nation he serves. America itself is full of contradictions, a land of opportunity rife with inequality, a beacon of freedom with a history of oppression, a place where anyone can rise but where many remain trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Perhaps that's why J.D. Vance resonates with so many Americans, regardless of their political affiliation. His story reflects America back to itself, the good and the bad, the promise and the failure, the ideal and the reality. He embodies the possibility of reinvention that lies at the heart of the American dream while never fully escaping the gravitational pull of his origins. When a journalist finally asked him directly about his greatest fear, his answer was revealing. "That I'll forget," he said simply. "That I'll forget what it was like to be hungry, to be scared, to feel like the world wasn't built for people like me." That fear, of losing touch with his authentic self amid the privileges of power, drives him in ways that conventional political ambition never could. And yet, as his national profile continues to rise and whispers of even higher office grow louder, the question remains, can J.D. Vance maintain that authenticity while climbing even higher on the political ladder? The pressures to conform, to simplify, to become a caricature of either conservative hero or conservative villain will only intensify. The true test of his character still lies ahead. What makes this story so compelling isn't just where J.D. Vance has been, but where he might be going. From the forgotten hills of Appalachia to the marbled halls of power, his journey embodies both the promise and the contradictions of modern America. And as he stands at this crossroads in his career, one thing becomes clear. The final chapter of J.D. Vance's remarkable story is still being written. But just when you think you understand the trajectory of this hillbilly-turned-statesman, remember this. The same unpredictability that has defined his past will almost certainly shape his future. The boy who once had no options now faces too many. The man who once had nothing to lose now has everything at stake. Whatever comes next in the J.D. Vance story, one thing is certain. America will be watching closely. The question is, which version of J.D. Vance will they see?